joining us today on Lattes With Leaders.
I'm Zainab.
And I'm Trisha. And we're excited for you to join us as we catch up over coffee with CEOs and executives from diverse backgrounds and industries.
We seek to discover what is unique about each leader and educate you guys on new and interesting topics. Our conversations seek to enlighten and inspire people from around the world to realize that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.
But now that I'm actually doing something that really connects and makes my heart tingle, I think is very, very, it's a wonderful feeling, honestly.
In this episode, we speak with Maaike Steinebach, a seasoned international executive with over 20 years experience in managing director and CEO roles. Her career has spanned the UK, Singapore, China, and Hong Kong, across companies such as Fortis Bank, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and Visa. Having discovered her passion for advancing the Femtech sector, she's now founded her own business to support and grow this industry. We speak with Maaike about leading a global career, having a growth mindset, and making the leap from corporate into starting your own business. All right, so we're on. Thank you so much for joining us, Maaike. I was introduced to Maaike from Anouk, who's one of our previous guests on Lattes with Leaders, who's also done a very amazing episode on globalization and global careers. And, I was looking to revisit that topic on, global careers and really expanding your horizons, taking on leadership roles in other countries and transitioning into different careers. And was recommended to Maaike. Seemed like she had such an incredible profile, working in a ton of different geographies. And so, we're very excited to have her on here. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here this morning.
Perfect. And so to get us started with, Maaike, do you want to introduce yourself and your career to date?
Sure. So my name is Maaike Steinebach. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I spent most of my youth actually in Saudi Arabia. So when people ask me, like, how did your kind of international career come about, I always start with talking about my parents first, because when I was 4 years old, they took me to Saudi Arabia, where I lived for 8 years. I always thank them for making us be curious about all the different cultures and experiences that we had, which obviously were very different from the ones I knew from the Netherlands. So after I spent my youth there, I moved back to the Netherlands for high school and university. So during university, I met my husband and I started work at a Dutch merchant bank at the cappuccino desk. So not the latte desk, but the cappuccino desk. So doing coffee, cocoa, dairy, and sugar trading. And when at the time was my boyfriend, when we were both in jobs, we basically said, well, whoever gets an opportunity to go and work internationally, we will take. So the second person I always thank for my international career is actually my now husband, because when I got an opportunity to continue to work in the commodity space in London, he was the first one to say, yep, I quit my job. I'll join you, basically. So that was very, very cool. So I moved to London, got married, and after a few years, I fell pregnant. And then my boss, and I have to say was a male boss, because it was really his he for she moment. He came up to me and said, oh, I have a really good idea. Why don't you move to Singapore and become the regional head of commodities for the bank that I was working for? And I said to him, are you out of your mind? I'm 5 months pregnant. I'm about to have a baby. I could be postnatally depressed. There could be lots of things happening. I've never worked in Asia. I've never led a team. And he really, in really true he for she moment, said, listen, we've talked about it. We think you would be a really perfect candidate. We will have your back. We will support you. But we think you can do it. So basically, I moved during my maternity leave, picked up the family, and kudos to my husband again. He said, "Yep, let's do it. Let's go." So in 2003, we moved to Singapore with a 3-month-old baby. So my boss in the UK is always the third person I basically thank for being where I am today. And then finally, I would have to thank my domestic helper. In the introduction, we were talking a little bit around support following a maternity, but I arrived in Singapore literally on the last day of my maternity leave to meet Maravik, who is our domestic helper from the Philippines. So she could take over the care of my son for a certain time whilst I went back to work. And what is really cool is actually 20 years later, she's still with us. Actually, next month it's going to be 20 years that she's with us. So she is the fourth person that I really credit and have to thank for every bit of career opportunity that I've had, because she has been, a really stable factor in my career. So from Singapore, when I arrived in Singapore, I had a team in Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Sydney. But the team in Singapore was actually doing quite well. They weren't necessarily in need of having a day-to-day leader at hand, but the China team, was new, had just received all kind of licenses. So then the bank asked me to pick up the family and move to China. So to move to Shanghai. So after 2 years in Singapore, I moved to Shanghai. I had 2 more babies whilst in Shanghai. And in 2009, you probably won't remember, but there was a global financial crisis, a big one. And the bank that I actually worked for was nationalized. And I had 2 options. You can either go back to Europe, or you could basically go to Hong Kong to help kind of with the asset recovery of all the assets that were now scattered all around Asia for the Dutch government-owned part of the bank. So I chose to go to Hong Kong. Arrived here now 14 years ago with a husband and 3 little kids. And spent a few years actually working still for the state-owned bank. But I was to an extent, I was disheartened by the lack of innovation in financial services. And I thought, if I really want to do one more stint in something in a bank that is really kind of putting innovation at the forefront, I should do that. So that's when I joined Commonwealth Bank of Australia as their CEO for Hong Kong. A really, really exciting time. I can explain a little bit more later, but it was very much focused on innovation, and it was really a career changing opportunity for me, actually, because I really, for the first time, encountered how technology was being applied in daily life, and was no longer just being spoken about as something abstract in a lab, but was actually something that people were applying in their day-to-day life. And that really made me think and focus on what I could do with technology. So following on that path of technology, 4 years ago, I ended up at Visa, which was also a really exciting times to be kind of in that fast-moving environment that is payments. But then I quit 2 months ago to start my own company in Femtech. So yeah, that's 25 years in a nutshell.
That's an amazing journey that you've had, and particularly drawing on your personal circumstances combined with the career moves that you've made, that I would say were quite bold given the
Mm,
timing for you. How
mm.
did you navigate that? Because you'd obviously gone on maternity, you'd arrived in this new country, I assume not a lot of contacts, and with a little baby. And then you did that again the second time going to China. What was that experience like for you, and what did you draw on to help you really embed yourself in where you were?
Yeah, it's a great question because I have thought about it a lot because I felt I was so lucky that I had a relatively smooth sailing, just in my whole career, but also in the international opportunities that I had. And firstly, I think it's a mindset. So as I mentioned, I think my parents kind of, as I grew up, infected me with this bug to be curious and to be excited for change and excited to explore other things and cultures. So I think that mindset really, really helped. I think the other thing that helped was with my partner when we were naively kind of saying, yeah, let's go and move abroad. He quit his job. He literally quit his job. So what happened was I was seconded by my company to London. So I basically just moved offices and, went straight into the work environment with colleagues and people that I knew. And he basically sat at home kind of alone, typing resumes, which you still did at the time, to find a job. So when we started moving later on, so from Singapore to Shanghai, the moment we knew that there was a move imminent, he actively started looking for work. So after that move from Amsterdam to London, actually all the subsequent moves for him, he basically had already prepared to have a job when he landed. And I think that really made a big difference kind of in our family dynamics, to be equals and also have an equal share in taking care of the household. So supporting the kids, but also our social life, for example. And then as I mentioned, my domestic helper, Maravik from the Philippines, what was really great is we managed to take her from Singapore to Shanghai to Hong Kong. So she was really a constant factor in our household, so that I could obviously, when the first time you have a young, toddler close to 2 years old, and then you have babies and smaller ones. So obviously that's really important for my role as a mother too, but having that help without having your family around or your parents has been an enormous contributing factor in making all these moves so much easier. And I think the fourth thing is, embracing that change and recognizing that it's going to be difficult, particularly when you move to a country that is very different from yours. And even, when I moved from Amsterdam to London, you would say that the Dutch and the English are very much the same, but the reality is they're not. Just like people also assume that the Dutch and the Australians have a lot in common, but the reality is they also don't. They probably have more things different than they have in common. So I think the trick is then to find what is that commonality and be curious about the new culture. So when I moved to China, I really started to try and understand how the dynamics work, what are important features in the way relationships are managed. So I read and spoke to a lot of people about Confucius, who kind of determines the different relationships that people have in society as teacher and student, boss and employee, father and son. So really try to learn. I also did a short stint actually in learning Mandarin, where I wasn't particularly successful in. And then I did a party trick just to kind of bridge the more kind of fun gap, is that I learned how to sing one song in Mandarin for karaoke. so that at least I could participate in some of the team events and make a complete fool out of myself for singing probably one very popular karaoke song completely wrong in Mandarin. But that also helped kind of build bridges and has really been a key to my success in China, I think.
And it sounds like you don't take yourself super seriously within that either, right? You've gone out of your way to learn about a culture knowing that you might make mistakes, but you're willing to laugh along the way within that.
Yeah, you make loads of mistakes. So I think when I first arrived in Singapore, it was really hard. I'd never managed a team, particularly not a team in a different country, spread over different locations, completely different culture. And I thought I actually had to act like I was in charge. So in hindsight, if I look back, I said so many stupid things. I really kind of tried to profile myself as being a leader. And my biggest takeaway after 3 months, firstly, that I was very unhappy. I think the team wasn't very happy. And I really had to sit myself down and say, okay, you're trying to be something that you're not. Maybe just try being yourself and take away, what the people around you that put you in this position have been saying, that they don't expect you to be perfect from day one. They expect this to be a very steep learning curve. But what they saw in you and what they liked about you was actually your authenticity and your ability to kind of just be yourself and be successful. So once I changed that attitude, that I'm not yes, I am a leader, but I'm actually, I'm still the person and human and mother and partner, Maaike Steinebach, actually everything went way smoother. It's kind of like I stopped the resistance and all of a sudden everything started flowing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting how you have like these assumptions before you make a decision like that, and you have to experience a reality of it. You think, oh, I should act this way, or I should be doing that. But then once you go through the learning experience, you realize something different, right? I remember you mentioned around innovation and really trying to pivot into the innovation space.
Yeah.
I think you'd also mentioned to me at one point that you had gone to the South by Southwest conference. Tell me about that experience. Tell me about, how you started to get interested in more of the tech side of things after your experience in banking.
Yeah, thank you. So what is interesting is at CBA, obviously very innovative, forward-thinking bank. And I was very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to go to South by Southwest. So we are talking 2014 now. And I really had no idea what this was about. I'd never heard of the conference. I only knew it was like a forward-looking tech conference. So I kind of went in with my eyes open. And what I saw was just really amazing. So the Winklevoss brothers were talking on stage about Bitcoin. The CEO of Under Armour was talking about, weaving wearables into clothing so that you could use data to measure your performance. And I was just flabbergasted, because I thought, okay, so I'm a CEO of a very innovative bank, but I know nothing about this space really. And I also realized that if I don't know this, then how can I ever imprint or give my team the opportunity to learn about this? And also, how do I educate our clients? Because they also, to a certain extent, live in their own little shipping bubble or oil and gas bubble. And how do I educate them as well? Because it's both an opportunity, but also a threat. If you look at, some of the companies that weren't innovating, that kind of got disrupted. There's also a risk angle there, that you kind of miss out on some of the innovation that's happening. So I went back to Hong Kong, and I made a pitch to the board to see whether they would be willing to consider opening an innovation lab in Hong Kong, which after a bit of back and throw, they did. So it was the first overseas innovation lab for Commonwealth Bank of Australia. And we really used it as a space for learning and for sharing, because this was all new. We used it as a space to collaborate with clients and teach them about blockchain, about data analytics, about how you could use 3D printing in your industry. We used it for sessions with our employees to show them about robotics and all the latest technologies, so that they stayed kind of front of mind on these topics as well. And we also used it for the community work. So we had we had a few people that were quite familiar with design thinking, and they helped a few organizations also in their efforts for design thinking. So at one point in time, we were speaking to some people in the ecosystem around setting up a Femtech Association. So through a design thinking session, we kind of came together to set up the Femtech Association. And that was basically like an industry body for everybody that was in the fintech ecosystem, which at the time was still very new, to make sure that they could communicate with the government, but also with other players in the ecosystem. And I very quickly realized, so firstly, that, it's important for everybody to stay informed about what is happening in the tech space, but that particular women were kind of left behind, because I looked around the room and I saw that all the fintech entrepreneurs were predominantly men. And then I thought, if we don't tackle this problem, the women are going to be left behind. And I'm sure there are women in this space, but they are just a lot less visible maybe than the men. So I created a WhatsApp group and for women in tech in Hong Kong, and basically invited every female that was doing something in tech. It could be either just I work for Microsoft or Google, or I have a health tech or a fashion tech startup. And what was interesting is all of a sudden, all these women popped up from the woodworks. And I think today we have like 450 women in that WhatsApp group. To see actually how many women are active in this space, but how we need to convince them to be a bit more visible. And we use that platform to showcase to the other people in the ecosystem, particularly conference organizers and event organizers, that if they were looking for a female in blockchain, that there were actually women in Hong Kong that could talk about blockchain. Or if they wanted somebody to talk about crypto, yes, there were actually a lot of women that were able to talk about crypto. I'm just rambling. Shall I?
Yeah, well, I actually just wanted to touch on something that I keep hearing from you. It's, the fact that you treat everything as a learning opportunity. Like every new thing that you come across, it's like, okay, I got to learn about it. I got to understand it. I got to figure out how we can implement it somewhere. And it's this mindset that I think is just so important, right? Even, I'm looking at in today's world, like the proliferation of AI, and now how everyone is trying to jump on the bandwagon and understand, what is it? What can it do? How can it change like all the different ways that we that we work and that we're productive. And I think a lot of business leaders are now questioning, like, how am I supposed to teach myself about this? Like, what is this new technology? And I'm curious, like, how. I mean, it sounds like you were exposed to different conferences and you sort of intentionally went out of your way to learn more. But what does it mean to adopt a growth mindset, particularly when you're an executive at a company and you're, like, it's easy to kind of settle in your ways, but you almost have to kind of balance, what versus what you still need to learn about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because, yes, you're absolutely right. I was looking for the word growth mindset, actually, but I don't know anything else. And I think I don't really understand the fixed mindset that much, because I feel that the growth mindset is so liberating when you can go through life and continuously learn new things and find new pathways and find, new amazing people to connect with, or things to know about. So I think fostering that growth mindset is super important. I try, and it's hard though, but I try to install it into my teenagers. I really did a lot of sessions at all the companies that I worked with to show the teams that there's so much more possibilities for you as an individual, but also for a team and for the benefit of the company if you actually adopt a growth mindset. And in the long run, which I'm experiencing now, having a growth mindset and trying a lot of different things, meeting a lot of different people, experimenting, will actually guide you on that path of finding your passion. So when I left Visa, a lot of people said to me, like, oh my God, we're so jealous. You found your passion. How did you do that? And I said, well, firstly, it took me 52 years to find. So this is not something that you just press a button and all of a sudden you have found it. But it has really been years and years, actually not looking for it, but just going through life as an experience and going through life as being open to opportunities, saying yes to a lot of things, trying, as you said, going to conferences, but also very simply, ever since I've been working in Hong Kong, I made it a habit to, at 1 or twice a week, have a coffee or a meeting with somebody that either approached me on LinkedIn and said, hey, I would like some advice, or hey, I'm interested in hearing this. That was some people that I didn't know, or people that I had heard about kind of in the community that I knew were doing something, but that I didn't know. And I just reached out to them and say, hey, would you be interested to connect over coffee? And that has really it broadens your horizon so significantly that, at one point in time, it will bring you closer and closer to kind of finding out what your purpose is.
Yeah, it's a good point because your current business is in the Femtech space. What is Femtech and what are you doing in this space? And why is it important to have companies in this space?
Yeah, so I think so. Femtech is basically a collection of. It's a name for companies that are active in a space that is looking to democratize the well-being of women. So this can either be their financial well-being, their physical well-being, their sexual well-being, their mental well-being. So if you look at this space, you will see that women are the primary caregivers in families. So they take care of their kids, of their elderly parents, but they also increasingly have full-time jobs, which means that if you look at the order of priorities, self-care for women is the lowest. And I can attest to that. I've gone through a massive personal health transformation because when I was 45, I realized that I'd actually taken care of, my kids, my friends, my husband, my colleagues, my employees, but I had completely neglected my own well-being. I was overweight. I didn't go to the gym. I wasn't doing kind of all the necessary health checks that I needed to do, body checks, pap smears, mammogram, what have you. And after I started looking into this, I realized there are a lot more women like me that can't find the time, don't know where to go, or are basically not prioritizing their whole well-being. But it's not for nothing that on an airplane, they tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. And whether you're a mother or whether you're a CEO, you have to almost be fit like an athlete to be able to care for others. So you can't care for others or guide others and lead others if you're not yourself in kind of in the prime of your life. And it took me a really long time to realize that. But I also realized that the existing infrastructure does not make that very easy, because we have 66% of all the health issues. And at least half of that 66% are menstruation or menopause or fertility or pregnancy. Not a lot of things that, men can help us with, and things that we have to do ourselves. So using technology to make access to those facilities easier, and basically closing the gap between the needs that women have. And I would say we're very lucky in Singapore and Hong Kong, Australia, and even in the US to have relative, good access to healthcare or insurance, at least in Asia. But the reality is that not everybody has that access. If you're in rural India, or if you're in Indonesia, or if you're in the Philippines, or even if you're in certain areas of Hong Kong, this is very, very hard. And actually then the healthcare is more about survival, but it's not about self-care for women that are going for their breast screenings or for their pap smears. So using technology could really close that gap between the unmet needs of women and the supply that they can get from the existing infrastructure. And the reality is that that gap is so big that actually the only way to close that gap over time is through the use of scalable technology, which would be digital health services, basically, and probably going forward powered also very generously by AI. So through my personal experience and now having spoken to a lot of women, I feel very strongly that this is what I should be focusing on. I also feel very empowered about speaking about this in Asia, because there is so much stigma and taboo around women's health, so many topics that nobody talks about, or talks about it in a very, very hush-hush way, certainly not being talked about in the workplace. So yes, there are a bit more progressive companies that would provide free period care to their employees and, are obviously have maternity and paternity leave. But there are so many topics that are just untouched and people do not talk about it yet, that I feel super empowered with my corporate experience to start doing that through my new company, Femtech Future.
So when you were going through your own transformations in life, from, for example, being single and working, to being married and working, to having children and working, and then now from moving in from the corporate world to owning your own business, how did you navigate these changes and transformations in life?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, because a lot of people said to me, "Oh my God, you're going to lose your identity, and you're going to feel very alien for a while as you kind of don't have your routine of your corporate life." I think what was a big change, the biggest change actually, was that last month, for the first time in 25 years, I was not actually getting a paycheck, a salary. And even though originally I thought I would find that idea very daunting, I actually, weirdly enough, found it liberating. And being able to now have the flexibility to determine where I work, when I work, how I work, and who I work with, despite the fact that doesn't mean that there is a fat paycheck coming in, has been such a wonderful feeling. I'm finding now that it's almost a bit overwhelming, because as you transition, there's a lot of people from my corporate life that are now reaching out and interested to hear what I'm doing and want to know, how that is and how things are going. But also, obviously, from a business development side, I'm also talking to a whole new group of people. So my network is almost on steroids at the moment, which is a lot of fun. But it's also a little bit overwhelming. So I feel that I need a few more weeks for that to kind of settle down. I feel that is really the transition of corporate life into working life.
Yeah, and I can hear the passion in what you're saying. It's like you've unlocked like the purpose and meaning behind what you want to be doing, and that's kind of fueling you forward, which seems to be like a different sort of energy to what you were in like your corporate life. Um, so
Yeah, I
that's
think to a certain extent in corporate life there are a lot of expectations. So there are expectations. So let me rephrase that. I think there are certain expectations in life, particularly for people of my generation. So you go to uni, you find a partner, you get married, you have kids, you work, you retire. That's a little bit how it could feel. And I think once you go into your working life, there is then directionally only one way, which is kind of up. So everybody in the workplace is kind of positioning themselves for their next promotion. And I, being already in the corporate space for more than, almost 25 years, you realize actually that what is it actually that I'm pursuing? Is it that holy grail of the money, or is it that CEO position? I mean, I've had, and granted, in smaller organizations, I've never been the CEO of a global organization, but I've been CEO of a regional organization. The question was really like, is my quality of life going to improve as I go higher up the ladder? Yes or no? And the answer was actually no. And having made that decision to leave that space, and again, I was a very happy employee for the longest part. I really enjoyed all the people and the teams and the companies that I worked for. But now that I'm actually doing something that really connects and makes my heart tingle, I think is very, very, it's a wonderful feeling, honestly.
I love that phrase that it makes your heart tingle. Um, I'm sure everyone out there like needs to go get that feeling. What does it mean to get your to make your heart tingle?
Yeah, so I think but I think people can, right? So when I left my last job, a lot of the employees say, "Okay, we're jealous. How can you find it? We like your courage. We would never do that. We have financial obligations." And I think that is all true. And there is a time and a place for everything. But I think if you're in a work, so firstly, my advice to a lot of young women, men, by the way, as well, is like, if you're in a work, do not stay in a workplace, in a job, just for your paycheck. There is more to life. We're only here for a finite period of time. So please be doing something that you enjoy. So if you don't enjoy your job, then take a step back and try and understand what it is that you really enjoy doing, and then go and look for that job instead of waiting for that job to come to you. But try and own, let's say, that space and own your career. The second thing I would say is be curious, read a lot, go online, do courses. So one of the reasons I got even more excited about Femtech was that during COVID, everybody was doing free Coursera courses on Harvard or MIT. And I actually went to sex tech school. So I had heard of Bryony Cole when I was in the OSCHAM Women in Business Committee. I heard about her. She's a global leader in sex tech. And she is one of the only people in the world that is like an expert in that space. And she got stuck in Melbourne during COVID, and she started sex tech school. And I thought, you know what? Something I know very little about. Let me do this. And what I realized was that there were this amazing community of global people that are working to try and solve problems around sexual wellness and sexual well-being for people, and being amongst a community of curious people, being amongst a community of people that were very entrepreneurial, very creative, very purpose-driven. So there were also people like me that were just kind of enthusiasts and were keen to kind of understand a little bit more about what this was about. But there were people that were so passionate and so driven that I got so inspired by being amongst these people to kind of say, okay, now let me also go and pursue my own passion. And if they can do it, I can do it. And yes, there will be financial uncertainty and there will be change. But actually, change is here to stay. We've gone through COVID. I mean, if you now have not onboarded the fact that change needs to be embraced and is a constant in our life, then, I'm not going to get anywhere anyway. So I might as well go and do it. And no regrets.
I love that. And that is a really great piece of advice to finish on.
Don't forget to check out our more recent episodes where we connect with global female CEOs to explore how to make it to the top. Whether your ambition is to be an executive at a corporate, build a franchise, or pivot your traditional career, check us out. Be sure to give us a like or follow on LinkedIn, TikTok, or Instagram at Lattes With Leaders. Our mission is to hear the voices of women from around the world. So if you're an avid listener and want your voice heard through our platform, please reach out.